By the time I read the message, the house was already loud. Not angry loud. Panicked loud. Phones vibrating on counters. My mother pacing between the kitchen and the hallway. My father standing still, staring at nothing, like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. I didn't react. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and watched the noise move around me. It felt distant, like I was observing a room through glass instead of standing inside it. The text came from my brother, Lucas Carter. It wasn't late. It wasn't rushed. It was sent at 2:14 p.m., the kind of time you choose when you want something to land and have witnesses. You're not invited to the wedding. Goodbye, loser. That was it. No explanation. No warning. No follow-up. Downstairs, someone said my name too loudly, like volume could fix it. Someone else asked if this was a joke. My aunt's phone kept buzzing on the coffee table, message after message stacking up as if they could bury the first one. Lucas hadn't sent it privately. He'd forwarded it into the family thread first. 23 people saw it before I did. Cousins. In-laws. People who'd already booked flights. People who would remember this version of me. I could hear my mother saying, "He didn't mean it like that," even though everyone knew he did. My father kept asking where his phone was, as if deleting something might rewind time or soften what had already hardened. No one asked me how I felt. They asked what I was going to do, like this was a problem to manage instead of a line that had been crossed in permanent ink. The humiliation wasn't loud. It settled in quietly, carried by glances and unanswered pauses, by the knowledge that this moment would travel without me. Lucas didn't call. He didn't apologize. He didn't check if I'd seen it. He sent it the way you place a signature on a document. Calm. Final. Confident that nothing would push back. I understood then that this wasn't impulse. It was positioning. Public. Precise. Designed to shrink me without him ever raising his voice. I stayed silent, and that silence made them uneasy. It does so. If you're listening to this somewhere quiet, tell me where you are right now. I remember exactly where I was. They all thought this was about a wedding. It wasn't. The house sat in one of those newer suburbs where everything looks intentional. Trimmed hedges. Neutral paint. Driveways wide enough to signal success without saying it out loud. My parents had chosen it years ago because appearances mattered to them. Stability mattered. Reputation mattered. The wedding planning had already taken over every surface. Manila folders stacked on the dining table. A printed guest list with highlighted names. Contracts clipped together, corners folded, deposits circled in pen. The venue brochure lay open, glossy photos of an upscale vineyard an hour outside the city. White arches. Imported chairs. A Saturday booking that cost more than most people's annual rent. Lucas's wedding wasn't just an event. It was a display. My mother talked numbers constantly. The $12,000 venue deposit. The 5-figure catering minimum. The guest count capped at 180. Every name debated like a board decision. My father handled the contracts, reminding everyone that everything was non-refundable after a certain date, as if money itself enforced authority. Lucas moved through it all like it belonged to him by default. He sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone while decisions were made around him. When he spoke, the room adjusted. When I entered, conversation slowed. That was the hierarchy. Everyone felt it. No one named it. Lucas was the golden son. The one whose milestones were family victories. His engagement had been announced with champagne. His career updates shared proudly with relatives who barely knew him. I was present, but never central. Useful, but temporary. When the text detonated, that hierarchy didn't shift. It hardened. My parents didn't argue with Lucas. They explained him. They reframed him. Stress. Pressure. Big day. Big responsibility. They spoke as if his behavior was a weather event, not a choice. I stayed quiet. I watched contracts being slid into folders, watched my mother reorganize the seating chart like order itself could undo embarrassment. No one asked Lucas to apologize. No one asked him to explain. Silence filled the spaces where accountability should have been. Lucas noticed. He leaned back, satisfied, scrolling again. The quiet didn't worry him. The silence made Lucas confident. I remembered the way Lucas moved through family gatherings before this moment. Always at the center. Always confident. A disagreement over dinner once ended with my opinion dismissed mid-sentence. He smirked. My father nodded, as if my words had been a test I failed. My mother tried to soften it, but her eyes told a different story. He was the son who could never be wrong. I was the daughter whose words required validation. Wedding planning only amplified this. Every detail a subtle measure of status. Every name on the guest list a signal of belonging. Lucas's wants dictated the conversation. My input was reduced to minor logistics. Make sure the table linens match, they said. Handle the invitations. Do this quietly, efficiently, and thank me later. I realized early on that I was expected to provide more than labor. Emotional support, reassurance, unspoken smoothing over of tensions. Guests never saw me, only the smoothness of the event, the seamlessness of my brother's life. I handled stress so he wouldn't have to. I absorbed disappointment silently, carried small disasters without complaint. I was invisible, but necessary. Lucas's confidence never wavered. He believed entitlement was a birthright. He believed charm could replace responsibility. He believed mistakes were for other people. Even my parents, in their performance of concern, reinforced his position. They applauded his decisions, reassured him when he faltered slightly. Meanwhile, my small victories went unnoticed. My words were filtered, my efforts minimized. I learned not to expect fairness. Yet, there was one presence I noticed. My grandfather, always quiet, often overlooked. He said little, but when he did, his words carried weight. Not yet active in the conflict, but there was a calm judgment in his gaze, the kind that could expose arrogance without raising a voice. I filed it away. I stayed quiet as always. Because in that silence, I observed. I calculated. I recorded the unspoken rules. Lucas smiled at the room, at the contracts, at the guest list. The air already bent to his advantage. He believed I needed them more than they needed me. By the time I reached for my phone, the message had already spread further than Lucas intended. Family group chats buzzed endlessly. Screenshots circulated. Comments arrived in waves. Some sympathetic, most amused, a few cruelly congratulatory toward him. Each ping reminded me that private humiliation was now public. My parents performed disappointment like actors on cue. Evelyn, you know he didn't mean it that way, my mother said softly, hands fluttering nervously over the edge of the table. My father added, let's not overreact. He's under a lot of pressure with planning. Pressure. Excuses. A shield for entitlement. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. Words would only feed the performance of control. I stayed silent, letting the message settle in the minds of everyone who had seen it. Every glance I received carried the weight of the announcement, a quiet confirmation of the space I had been assigned in this family hierarchy. Lucas escalated without hesitation. He sent a follow-up text in a smaller, subtler tone. A joke, he called it, about double-checking the guest list. The text reached aunts and cousins. It reached people who had barely met me. He made them question whether I had caused this. And they believed him, because he presented it as a fait accompli, a natural order of things. Every time someone asked me if I was upset, I nodded briefly. I didn't speak beyond necessity. My silence carried no anger, no pleading. Just observation. Just quiet endurance. And in that, I saw the cracks forming in the facade of Lucas's control. Overconfidence grew in him with each unread reply. He walked around the house smiling, taking small victories as though they were monumental achievements. The wedding, the family, the approvals, they all existed to validate him. I didn't compete. I didn't argue. He mistook my quiet for surrender. Everything shifted the moment I opened the folder my father had left on the counter. Contracts, invoices, receipts stacked neatly. I scanned through them without haste. One number caught my eye immediately. $23,750. It was the deposit Lucas had paid for the venue. A figure meant to signal commitment, prestige, seriousness. In reality, it revealed dependency. The deposit had come from a joint account my parents managed. Not Lucas's personal funds. Every cent traceable. Every transaction documented. I leaned back, letting the weight of the number settle. Lucas had been orchestrating his own image of independence, but in truth, he relied on the family infrastructure for every public triumph. Every luxurious choice, every seemingly confident decision, rooted in accounts I had access to. Not access yet exercised, but I knew the exact pathways, the signatures required, the authorizations that could stop his plans before they even reached completion. He believed the wedding, the approvals, the meticulous seating charts, all belonged to him. He believed the contracts were his to manage. He believed the deposit confirmed his power. I didn't call him out. I didn't hint. I simply noted. Calculated. Silently prepared. No one else knew I held this leverage. My parents continued to perform neutrality. Lucas continued to parade confidence. The room, the plans, the contracts, all aligned with his ego. But the truth existed quietly, hidden in spreadsheets, bank statements, and signed papers. I could disrupt the entire operation without raising my voice. Without emotional confrontation. All it would take was one authorization denied, one procedural requirement highlighted, one signature withheld. And suddenly, the image of self-sufficient control he curated would collapse. I closed the folder and placed it back exactly where it had been. No hint of my awareness escaped me. The air remained calm, the room unaware. But in my mind, a quiet reversal had begun. That number wasn't emotional, it was legal. The first knock came just as Lucas was reviewing the seating chart. A firm, measured knock. My father went to the door, hesitation in his steps. It was Maria, the family's wedding planner. She didn't smile. She carried a binder thick with contracts and payment records. Everything neat, organized, immovable. She had been quiet for months, a presence nobody noticed until her authority became necessary. "Hello," she said simply, glancing briefly at Lucas. "Everything is ready on schedule, except a few items that need immediate attention." Her tone left no room for debate. No charm could sway her. No status could override her knowledge. Lucas's smile faltered, just slightly. He adjusted his posture, straightened the lapels of his blazer. Confidence still radiated, but the slightest crease of doubt formed. She began outlining pending authorizations, deposits, and compliance checks. Each point confirmed what I already knew. The $23,750 deposit. Vendor deadlines. Non-refundable clauses and required approvals. My parents, who had been the orchestrators of calm, began to shift. They muttered about schedules, about talking to Maria later, about handling things delicately. The narrative they controlled was fragmenting. Their explanations and justifications, once dominant, now carried a softer tone. I remained quiet. I didn't intervene. I didn't speak. I let the authority speak for me. The room listened. The family hierarchy trembled without anyone noticing immediately. Maria paused at one point, flipping to a contract I had marked discreetly weeks before. She referenced it in passing, confirming the deposits, the timelines, the signed agreements. It wasn't my involvement that mattered yet. It was the neutral authority validating the leverage quietly held. Lucas blinked. Not audibly, but I saw it. The buzz of phones and family chatter dulled. The room's energy shifted imperceptibly. Control was no longer assumed. Validation had entered externally, objectively, immovably. I remained still, calm, observing, knowing the shift was subtle but permanent. That's when the room changed. I didn't act immediately. Months had passed since I first noticed the cracks in Lucas's confidence. Every conversation he had, every contract he signed, every deposit he assumed was final, I observed. I made notes quietly. I organized, annotated, and verified every document, every agreement, every signature. The family never suspected. The wedding logistics, the contracts, the timelines, all seemed to flow through him effortlessly. He believed he was untouchable. He believed confidence alone could enforce obedience. He was wrong. I began to disclose the preparation slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gesture dramatically. I merely produced the binder Maria had reviewed, this time with additional documentation he had never expected me to compile. Invoices traced. Deposits highlighted. Contracts signed correctly, but requiring approvals he couldn't bypass. I handed it over calmly. Lucas's expression shifted almost imperceptibly at first. A twitch in his jaw. A blink too slow. He realized, gradually, that the control he believed was his had been an illusion. I had never challenged him emotionally. I had never reacted publicly. And yet here was the evidence. A network of authority, legality, and preparation that bypassed his assumptions entirely. The room noticed. My parents noticed. Even Maria looked at me differently. This wasn't about anger or spectacle. It wasn't about revenge in its loudest form. It was an intellectual dismantling, precise and unshakable. Lucas's strategies, which had relied on others' fear and assumption, collapsed quietly but completely. He leaned back in his chair, reaching for composure he no longer owned. He wanted to argue, to charm, to reassert dominance. But the evidence was immovable. The quiet patience, the planning, the observation, all had shifted power without a single raised voice. For the first time, he saw me not as background, not as a helper, not as someone expendable. He saw the calculation, the authority, the strategic precision. He realized he had been playing chess with someone who had already anticipated every move. Not dramatically. Lucas finally looked at me, unmistakable not above me. His hands tapped the table faster than necessary. He adjusted the lapels of his blazer repeatedly. His eyes darted between the binder I placed before him and Maria's calm, unyielding stare. He scrambled to explain. "Wait, this isn't right. There must be a mistake," he said, voice pitched just above casual, hoping no one would notice the tremor. Every word sounded rehearsed, defensive. Every phrase betrayed overconfidence collapsing into panic. My parents froze. The performance of authority and poise that had carried them this far evaporated. My mother's hands dropped to her sides. My father remained rigid by the window, staring but unable to interject. They had created Lucas, celebrated him, and now witnessed him unravel before them. Silence was heavier than any argument could have been. Maria and I didn't move. We let the evidence speak for itself. We let the contracts, the numbers, the legal weight of the preparations do the dismantling. We held our ground quietly while Lucas flailed in a tight orbit of denial and subtle lashing. He attempted charm. He attempted reasoning. He tried redirecting attention, insisting deadlines could be adjusted, deposits managed, approvals renegotiated. Every tactic failed. Every argument crashed against the structure of preparation and authority he had never considered. Guests and relatives lingered quietly, sensing tension without understanding the details. The wedding, once a symbol of his status, began to unravel in small, perceptible ways. Tables misaligned in their seating charts. Vendors called with corrected confirmations. Florals had to be rearranged. Even the photographer paused, unsure how to proceed as authority and expectation shifted visibly. Lucas's confidence eroded further with each passing second. The room that had once celebrated him now leaned subtly toward the evidence, the structure, the invisible hand orchestrating the shift. It was not loud. It was not theatrical. But it was irreversible. That's when Dad spoke. My father finally spoke. Not with panic. Not with volume. Just a firm, measured tone that demanded attention without raising it. "Lucas," he said, "enough." The room shifted immediately. It wasn't shock as much as it was recognition. People straightened. Breathing seemed to pause collectively. I didn't need to move or intervene. The authority was external, but it validated what had already begun quietly. The control Lucas assumed was never his to hold. He continued, meticulously, without dramatics. "Contracts are binding. Deposits are documented. Approvals cannot be bypassed. Evelyn has been correct in all observations." The words landed with weight. No lecture. No justification for previous mistakes. Just fact, stated plainly. I realized, as he spoke, that this was more powerful than any argument or confrontation could have been. Lucas's face changed, imperceptibly at first, then visibly. The calm arrogance he had relied upon faltered. Every micro-expression betrayed comprehension. The golden sun wasn't untouchable. Hierarchy, which had been so heavily stacked in his favor, crumbled incrementally. This was not a moment of shouting or blame, it was a repositioning of reality itself. My parents' own reactions were muted. They had built Lucas up for years. And now, quietly, they witnessed the architecture of authority, preparation, and correctness overtaking entitlement. My mother's lips pressed together. My father's hands unclenched from the windowsill. Even extended family members, who had arrived with social expectations and assumptions, sensed the recalibration. No one needed to be told. The room understood the shift. I stayed seated, silent as ever. Lucas tried to speak again, fumbling. "But, Dad, Enough, my father said again, firmer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. He didn't explain himself further. The restraint itself carried authority. I watched my brother try subtle intimidation. He attempted charm, attempted pleading, attempted rationalization. Each tactic collided with the wall of undeniable truth my father had just confirmed. Nothing worked. The overconfidence that had allowed him to text me the words "You're not invited to the wedding. Goodbye, loser," now evaporated completely. Even his tone, once polished and assured, quavered slightly. The wedding, the planning, the contracts, everything he had assumed belonged to him, now existed in a landscape where I was recognized as competent and essential. But it wasn't about me being praised. It wasn't about a dramatic victory. It was a quiet rebalancing of authority. A correction he could not reverse, and one I would never need to dramatize. I could see it in Lucas's posture, in the small tightness of his shoulders. I could see it in my mother's face, the way her eyes widened slightly. I could see it in Maria, who nodded minutely, acknowledging the shift that had taken place. I didn't speak. I didn't add commentary. I simply absorbed the scene, the subtle unraveling of control. My father, ever restrained, closed the moment with quiet finality. "I expect adherence to procedure," he said, "and no further deviations without consultation. No applause. No cheering. No theatrics. Just authority, calm, undeniable." I realized in that moment how fragile assumptions of power could be. How much could be overturned not with shouting, but with preparation, validation, and patience. How silence, when coupled with evidence, becomes more powerful than anger. Lucas shrank into the chair he had once claimed as his throne. The room, for the first time in years, did not orbit him. He tried subtle manipulation. He tried charm. He tried all the small behaviors that had previously kept people pliable. They failed, one by one, silently. I didn't feel victorious, I felt finished. The wedding unfolded as planned, at least on the surface. Tables arranged. Flowers in place. Vendors executing every instruction down to the last detail. But the energy was fractured. It wasn't just Lucas who felt the shift. Everyone around him sensed it. Guests whispered. Not about the event itself, but about the cracks beneath the polished exterior. Some cousins exchanged glances when he passed. Aunt Marlene, who normally fawned over his accomplishments, kept her distance. Even vendors who had never met me before subtly treated my instructions with more deference than they gave Lucas. It was a quiet social correction, unspoken yet immediate. Lucas moved through the ceremony with forced composure. Smiles that didn't reach his eyes. Jokes that landed poorly. He realized too late that the confidence he had wielded like armor no longer protected him from observation, judgment, and consequence. Every attempt to reclaim dominance was met with procedural reminders, subtle corrections, or professional neutrality. Authority, once his tool to charm and control, now stood against him in quiet, unyielding ways. I observed from the margins. No cheers. No visible satisfaction. I didn't engage. I didn't comment. I let the events unfold, knowing that every misstep he made reinforced the balance that had shifted quietly but irreversibly. My parents tried to intervene occasionally, smoothing interactions, attempting to redirect focus, but their influence had waned. They couldn't restore the narrative they had so carefully constructed for him. Their attempts were small, unnoticed ripples in a current that had already turned. The ceremony itself became a rehearsal of social recalibration. Guests followed the lines of authority, unintentionally reinforcing my presence and guidance without anyone needing to announce it. Even Lucas's closest friends observed a subtle difference. He was no longer in control. Not fully. I never confronted him. I never gloated. I didn't speak his failures aloud. Silence remained my most effective tool. The lessons of preparation, patience, and authority had completed themselves without spectacle. When the vows were exchanged and the cake cut, I quietly stepped back. I removed myself from the center of their constructed world. Distance became my final assertion of control. I didn't attend the wedding. I closed the door behind me and felt the weight lift, not in celebration, but in clarity. Years of quiet observation, measured patience, and careful preparation had culminated not in applause or vindication, but in distance. The house, the family, the events, they existed without me now. And for the first time, That absence felt like ownership. I walked through the empty streets of the suburb, past the neatly trimmed hedges and familiar driveways. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across sidewalks I had traced so many times, once under their rules, now under my own steps. Every breath carried calm. Every movement reminded me that control could be exercised quietly, internally, without spectacle. I thought of Lucas. He had believed confidence alone could enforce obedience. He had believed charm could replace preparation. He had believed I would submit, quietly, emotionally, socially. And yet, through silence and precision, I had rewritten the architecture of our interaction. Without yelling. Without confrontation. Without drawing unnecessary attention to myself. My parents remained behind, performers of status and reassurance, trying to recalibrate a world they had long assumed belonged to their son. I had left that world. I had left their expectations. I had left the subtle pressures and constant assumptions about my labor, my worth, and my presence. In walking away, I reclaimed stability. I reclaimed autonomy. I reclaimed a sense of dignity that no family event, no text, and no social hierarchy could ever strip from me again. I didn't need validation through confrontation or spectacle. The quiet understanding that I had preserved myself was enough. I reflected on power and dignity. Power could be loud, overconfident, even cruel. Dignity required patience, observation, and knowing when to step aside. There was a weight in that realization, a peace that felt almost foreign after years of negotiation and compliance. I had learned that silence, when paired with strategic knowledge, can be devastating in ways that anger never is. It can shift perception, correct assumptions, and enforce consequence without ever raising a voice. It can allow someone to walk away whole, intact, and unassailable, even when the world expects them to crumble. I paused at the edge of the street, looking back at the house one final time. No anger lingered. No celebration surged. Just recognition of what had been reclaimed. I didn't attend the wedding. I didn't speak to Lucas. I didn't explain myself. And yet, the impact of my quiet authority resonated far beyond my absence. I took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill me, anchoring me in this moment. The world continued without me in that room, but I was complete. I had preserved myself. I had retained my clarity. And in that preservation, I found a strength far beyond what confrontation or spectacle could ever provide. Walk carefully, observe quietly, act deliberately. You don't always need to be seen to be powerful. If you've listened all the way to the end, I want to know something. Not out of curiosity, out of connection. Tell me where you're watching from, and if this story felt familiar to you. Because when someone makes it this far, it usually means they've lived a version of it too.